Welcome back to Left Unattended. Today's conversation is one I think many neurodivergent professionals and overthinkers are going to feel in their bones. Dr. Amber Parks is a veterinarian, diplomat of the American Board of Veterinary Practitioners in canine and feline practice, and a stress, burnout, and clinical support coach for veterinary professionals. She has spent more than 25 years in veterinary medicine, including 17 as a veterinarian. And after her own experience with burnout and late diagnosed ADHD, she now helps veterinary professionals navigate overwhelm, perfectionism, people-pleasing, imposter syndrome, and the pressure to keep performing when the cost is getting too high. Today, we'll be talking about what happens when the traits that make someone excellent at their job also become the traits that exhaust them when the workplace is not designed with their brains in mind. So Amber, before we get started into neurodivergence and burnout and workplace design, first, I want to thank you for being here. And I'd love for listeners to know, you as a whole person. So, who are you? And talk to me about your path through your career and what that looked like.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. For myself, I think probably many of us, always knew that I wanted to be in veterinary medicine of some capacity. And so even in middle school and then going into high school, I started working at a practice. Neurodivergence wasn't even a word, back then. And that never even crossed my mind until much later, which we'll go into. But I always had that affinity for animals, for science, for learning. And it really took me into vet school. And then coming out, I started in a small animal private practice where I was there for about a decade and got very burnt out and thought, oh, for sure, the solution to my burnout will be to do relief work. And I'll be able to just leave the stress and chaos of any practice and bolt on to the next one down the street. And in that, I did actually find that I felt a lot better. And then I ended up burning out again and kind of came full circle of seeing a lot of veterinary professionals that were experiencing the same thing that I was. I was just seeing it in every different hospital I went into. Didn't matter the structure, management, how it was run, good, bad, or indifferent. And it really, in my process, made me really identify hey, there's a common theme here. And a lot of us are struggling and no one's really bringing that to the forefront and having an honest conversation about it.
Yeah, it's so true. I see that too, where we keep thinking the next job is just going to be I'll take less responsibility, or, the next job will have a better culture. Yeah. The next job will fix all of the problems, right? And then everything seems to come back around and cycle over again. So I'm curious from your perspective, so somebody who went from veterinarian to coach, right? I had a very parallel experience going from leadership into coach. Where did coaching enter the picture for you?
Yeah, so I never really knew that it was a thing until I was already in my burnout journey of healing. And I inadvertently was actually coaching veterinary professionals in my relief work, because anyone that does relief work, many times when we go into a practice, everyone's unless you work there frequently, and then you kind of become hey, we already know you. But many people are oh, you're the new doctor. You're going to save us today, right? If you weren't here, craziness was going to ensue. So you're always, most of the time, very welcome. So they felt very comfortable, I think, being oh, you're not in our inner circle. So you're just this outsider, but you get the profession. So I can kind of expand on my frustrations and challenges. And we would just kind of have an open dialogue, and realizing that I'm actually coaching these people. They were looking for support, for someone to identify what they were dealing with, but not someone that they directly worked with. So that's kind of how it started. And then I found out about coaching. I'm oh, this is a thing. This is exactly what I need to be doing.
Yeah, I also fell into it. So it was a matter of what kind of CE do I want to take and professional development do I want to take? And next thing I know, I'm mashing together my neurodiversity advocacy and coaching together. It was like, wow, I can actually make an impact bigger than I had before. So yeah, I love that. Love your story for that. So for you, like at what point did burnout become something that like you could no longer ignore? What was that inflection point?
Yeah, it was oddly, sadly, it wasn't a one point in my life. It was a culmination of situations and challenges. And I finally was like, how much more do I want to suffer? And I think going to do relief work actually was a benefit because there was a short period of time that I didn't feel burnt out. And it was because it was new, it was novel, right? That should have been a hint that there was probably some sort of neurodivergency there. Missed that 100%. But it was something that I do believe it was like, how much more am I going to take and just be miserable? Like, I can't see myself doing this for 10, 20 years. And when I started to dive into, honestly, it was therapy that kind of showed me the word burnout. Like, I really was not aware of what that was. And then I started reading about it and I thought, oh, wow, this is me to a T. And this has been me for years at this point. So it was almost, in a way, it almost made me feel a little bit better because then I realized, oh, this is a thing. I'm not by myself. There's nothing wrong with me. And now this is something that we can move through versus something I just have to suffer because everyone else is.
Yeah, isn't that so powerful? Every time we get a new awareness piece, it's always like, oh, there's nothing wrong with me. And then you get another awareness, oh, there's nothing wrong with me. It seems to be a theme of awareness in
Yes, for sure, whether we like it
very
or
many
not,
things.
right?
So, yeah. So you're somebody who identifies as being ADHD. So you and I have a lot in common in that respect. Like what changed for you when you finally had that language to describe, I don't know, for lack of better words, gave you the life's handbook that we didn't have growing up?
Yeah. So I was just diagnosed last year. So late diagnosed as 42-year-old. Yeah. And looking back, I know for probably a lot of people in our position or in my position, it just connected the dots. Some people say they go through like a lot of guilt or frustration or anger. And I remember thinking like, yes, but no, because this was always me. It just means there's more people like me out there. And what really, I think, brought everything to the surface was that I had started therapy almost a decade before. And I saw a therapist who I had a really good connection with every other week for almost 8 years. And there was never a discussion of neurodivergency, autism, ADHD, anything, which I'm not knocking therapy. I learned a lot in therapy, but I think probably a lot of people in the mental health field would agree that just the parameters that we diagnose and we're able to identify in girls and women, we're just now catching up and identifying those symptoms and clinical signs, if you will. So, but I say that too, to know that if someone is seeking therapy and you feel like there's a missing piece here, like that was it for me. And then the final icing on the cake as a woman starting perimenopause. And I think there's also a lot of support where ADHD women tend to, there is actually a study, I think, that ADHD women hit perimenopause earlier. So didn't realize, like, just going on through life. And it to the point that it smacked me upside the head that I literally thought I'm having dementia. I can't remember anything. I was still in clinical practice at the time. And I remember being scared because I couldn't remember things. I couldn't have a conversation with people. And so that's what really got me to seek out, like, there's something else here. And I got a diagnosis at ADHD first. And then my psychologist said, okay, we'll work through this and, gave you some support. And then like the next appointment, I was like, I'm pretty sure I'm autistic as well. And she's like, well, hold on. A lot of these, kind of cross over. And I'm like, now I feel really comfortable. I know myself, but then, went through the testing and got formally diagnosed for both. So it's been interesting. And honestly, the first thought I thought was, oh, wow, this makes a lot of sense. And literally the second thought was, oh my gosh, this is why I burnt out. And I think this is happening to a lot of people in veterinary medicine, and they have no idea.
Oh, you're like speaking my language right now. I constantly talk about how women are most likely to be diagnosed when they have a child and their child is struggling. They're like, but wait, I should also struggle with that. Or they're diagnosed during perimenopause when all of your coping mechanisms and scaffolding kind of fall apart. And I had somebody explain it to me, like she had a friend of mine had a concussion, and she's like, it's almost like having a concussion, where she's like, the brain fog was just, and I couldn't function the way I used to function anymore. But that was the only way that she could really explain it to me for someone who doesn't experience that, obviously.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. It was profound.
I can't even imagine. What parts of your life looking backwards suddenly make more sense, right? Because I always find myself looking back in life and going, oh.
Oh, yes. Yeah. I think, well, I joke with my parents. I'm like, when we go way back, I was a little kid and I didn't like the seams in my socks. And, there was a meme I saw not that long ago, and I sent it to my parents, and it was like me as a little kid complaining about the seams in my socks. And then I get diagnosed as autistic as an adult. And my parents were like, oh my goodness, you are? So it started very early, like wearing denim jeans. Like I never wore jeans until like high school. It was like obviously a sensory thing. As far as practice goes, it was a production. Like I just put on a show for people, and the masking when I would go into exam rooms and have conversations, I literally just thought that was good customer service. But I realized I was subconsciously taking in people's, body language, their micro expressions, what they do, what they don't say, and then filling in the gaps to make sure that they felt taken care of. But the problem was I was like over functioning, over explaining, and hyper vigilant. And that was so, so exhausting. I think that was like really the breaking point for me.
Oh, I resonate with a lot of that.
Yeah.
Were there things that you used to sort of judge yourself for that you kind of now understand differently?
Yeah, the biggest one was client interactions. So like the 3 seconds before I have to go into an exam room, I would literally be like, will the fire alarm go off? Maybe I don't have to go into this room. Maybe and I could have the best, nicest client who loves to get educated, and I enjoyed that, but it was just so draining for me that those are the ones that I'm like, is everyone else like, I just never even occurred to me that I might be different than someone else. I just felt like I'm, a high achiever and I'm just, putting too much thought into this. But, when you think you could see anywhere from like, I don't know, 15 to maybe 25 new people a day, when we put that into perspective of neurodivergence, we don't give ourselves enough credit of how exhausting that truly is.
Oh, yeah. I interviewed Dr. Jody Wilson from Australia a couple episodes back. And so the one thing that she really kind of brought out of me was like, we always think about the diagnosis as like a label, but it often gives us a new lens, right? So it lets us kind of go back through our life and through our history and say, oh, here's where I wasn't failing. I was just not supported. And I do that constantly. Like things will come up. And ever since she said that to me, it's like really changed how I think about my past.
Yeah. And I think I definitely have done the same and given myself a lot of bandwidth to not explain myself, not, now like the mask has just kind of fallen off. And so that's been an interesting journey too. But yes, looking back, giving myself permission that the things that I was experiencing wasn't because I didn't do enough, or I could have done it different, or I could have done it better. And that was validating, honestly, very validating.
I agree. You had mentioned the hypervigilance, which I see often. I don't know if that's a trauma response of all of the negative feedback that we have gotten probably younger in our lives. And I know that there's really big stats out there for that. But when do you think that pattern recognition kind of becomes hypervigilance? Like, where do you see that difference?
There isn't, right, like one event. It just kind of starts melding into one. And I think the more I was in practice as a doctor, that's when I started to really see that there were a lot of like, well, this happened before, and this is kind of looking like the same situation. And so I need to get ahead of it. And for me personally, a lot of that was client interactions and like, oh my gosh, this client might be upset with me. So then I'm overcompensating and crossing T's, dotting I's. Maybe like my tech is amazing, but I'm double checking that person, or I'm going out of my way to, answer emails on my day off. And, because if I wait another day and then they might be upset and then I have to deal with that. So we rationalize that doing those things that are hypervigilant are actually very helpful. And these are what we should be doing. And I was just talking to one of my coaching clients, and she totally put words to what thoughts I had, which was the sense of urgency was always there. And it's kind of driven by that hypervigilance of, yeah, but remember that one time you didn't do the thing and that happened. So if you do it now and get ahead of it, you should be fine. And that mental and thought loop is like so exhausting, and it can be so detrimental really too.
Yeah, I don't know about you and your clients, but I definitely have to work with clients about like, what is the underlying message, right? Like that hypervigilance, that always scanning for the problem, like it's gotten us safe and it's protected us, but it also isn't the message isn't what it is saying, right? The message, the underlying thing is protection from the fear of failure or the negative feedback or whatnot. And so we always have to like remind ourselves, and I do it with my clients all the time, is like, okay, but what was the underlying message to that hypervigilance response, or to that negative inner critic that we talk about? So
yeah, I see that a lot too with a client that I had, the other day. I see it a lot in a lot of us, and it's we've convinced ourselves that this is what we're supposed to be doing because we have done that so many times. And yes, and then same thing. I'm like, well, why are you doing this? And what is your goal? And they are like, well, I guess if it comes down to it, yeah, I'm afraid of what a client might think of me or what my colleague might think of me. And I'm like, okay, that's the bigger piece that, yeah, we've got to like peel that onion away to get to.
You had mentioned earlier about the sensory overload and the socks. I feel like I was alone in having a sock story. And then I find out like it's very common along the autistic community that we all have a sock story. Like when I think about like noise and lighting and whatnot, like what does that look like for you inside the clinic? Or what were the things and I know everybody's experience is different, but what for you did that look like with the sensory overload?
Yeah, I definitely just ignored all the red flags my body and my brain were telling me and just steamrolled on through that, for a decade plus in practice. I think the biggest ones were lighting. Like when we would have euthanasia, we would dim the lights so everyone knew. And I was like, oh, this is so nice. Can we just keep the fluorescent lights off? Yes, it changes the whole, like fluorescent lighting does nothing for anyone other than we can see obviously on exam a lot better. But other than that, it just is not inviting, yeah. But the other thing was noise, for sure, noise. And I can deal with certain things, but a barking dog that won't stop, and then a ringing phone at the same time, and then a, client service representative or tech comes up and is asking me a question. And I'm like, I have no idea what you just asked me because I'm very close to ripping my hair out. But the funny, not so funny thing was that I never showed any of that. I felt it inside and just thought too that I was burnt out and I was irritable, but it was really, I was completely ignoring what would have been, ideal for me for sure.
Yeah, oh gosh, I think you and I have so much more in common than we realize. uh, I constantly find that I've got to pull my clients out of their intellectual brain, right? We get so intellectualized in the experience that we're not listening to our bodies. So if you were to think back about being in the clinic, like what do you think was happening in your body when the phones were ringing and the lights were buzzing? I hate those. If I speak at every conference, I'm like, if you do nothing else, if you just replace your fluorescent lighting with LEDs, like you become more neuroinclusive, do nothing else. But like for you, what do you think was happening in your body that maybe we ignore when those sensory overwhelm was happening?
Yeah, a lot of it, and I still struggle with this, but like my shoulders are up to my ears. Like I'm just walk around like this and so tense. And I still struggle with migraines, although they're much better, but I would just get that from like my, shoulders and neck being constantly tight all day long and not realizing it, maybe feeling tight, but just not addressing it and just continuing to go on and do the next thing. And even something as simple as, taking like 5 minutes just to remove myself from the chaos of the noise and the lights, just to like bring myself maybe down to baseline is something that I never did. But I realized actually, as I started doing relief work, I would just run to the bathroom and like would sit in there with quiet for 5 minutes. And only once did someone knock on the door, like Dr. Parks. I'm like, oh gosh, please give me 5 minutes. Like obviously it was an emergency, but that wasn't even crossing my mind as something that I should have done or that would have even helped me.
Like looking back, hindsight being 2020, are there any other things that you think could have helped you or things that your clients have brought up to you about what has helped them?
Yeah. So I think the task switching is something we almost pride ourselves on. I know I did. Like I can multitask. Isn't that great? Meanwhile, I'm like, that is the worst thing. Like, no. Could I do it? Yes. What do we always say to clients? Just because you can do it doesn't mean we should be doing it, right? It's something that it was incredibly taxing on my, obviously, concentration, mental bandwidth. And it didn't really have that outward benefit as I thought that it truly did, because it just felt like I was taking care of everyone else. So I was like, oh, this is great. Meanwhile, it's going to take me at least another 5 minutes to get back to what I was doing and where my train of thought was. So it wasn't really that beneficial to the task I was doing, but also to people I was working with as well. But that wouldn't have even registered. Like I'm in surgery. Can you just grab a calculator and I'll just tell you the calculation as I'm like, really stop. Like you're in surgery. This isn't life or death calculation for, the dose that this dog's going whole with later today. Just wait, but in my mind, it was that hypervigilance of, well, let me just get this done. It's one less thing I have to do. And yes, that I would change that if I could.
I think this is where like neuroinclusion becomes like really practical for workplaces. Sometimes like support, it's not like a dramatic accommodation. I think oftentimes employers and leaders, I think there's like this big fix and there's this mountain to climb in order to be neuroinclusive. And sometimes it's just like a quieter place to write records or fewer unnecessary interruptions like the calculator when you're in the middle of surgery, or better lighting. Gosh, get rid of your fluorescent lighting if you're listening, please.
Yes.
Or like a workflow that doesn't require someone to constantly rip their attention from one thing to the next thing, right? Like when we build our workflows around our attention being moved from place to place to place. Like that is a very neuroinclusive way to lead. So yeah.
I know. I think a lot of the neuroinclusive things are just beneficial for people as humans too. Like I don't think it any benefits anyone to bounce back and forth between going to an appointment, going into an exam room and grabbing that phone and then answering that receptionist question. And, like it just, because we do it, we don't really think twice, but I have yet to meet someone that actually benefits from being pulled in multiple directions like that.
I agree. I always say that if we build our workplace on neuroinclusion, we just help everyone. Like there's just without a doubt, people's cognitive load decreases even when it's not a problem for them. Like it helps everyone. So we start talking about some of the work that you do with burnout, perfectionism, and people pleasing. Like, and you're working with veterinary professionals around that. Like, how do those patterns show up in people's lives?
Yeah, I see a lot of common themes. Everyone's experience is a little bit different, but the biggest common theme I see is if I don't do this, then it won't get done. Or if I don't do this, my coworker is going to do it and it's not going to be perfect. So I'm just going to do it. I'll be faster. And I'm guilty of all of these. And we start to just do it out of necessity, but then we also somehow convince ourselves that this is working and this is what we need to do to continue, except it's like a speeding freight train and we just pile on more things and it gets more complex. And then most of the time, that's usually when I meet my clients and they're like, I can't do this anymore. And they're doing the job of 3 people and they know that, but they also are like, but I can't stop. Like that is not a rational thought. So it's like we said before, it's raking like what is really going on underneath the waterline here. Like there are some fears that we have to get to. And then the tangible, tactical things of how do I have a conversation with maybe it's a client who really wants to suck your time away, or maybe it's a colleague or coworker who just isn't pulling their weight. And how do I have that conversation? Because a lot of times we know what we need to do. It's just those fears are what is driving that internal dialogue. That's like, this isn't going to go well. You might lose your job. They're going to think you're X, Y, and Z. And so we just don't do that and repeat the cycle.
What do you see as the cost of people pleasing? Because I always think like it keeps us safe in one way, but what's the cost of people pleasing?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of costs that we don't realize. And I think part of that is we don't know ourselves. We actually don't know what we want. And I'm sure that you've probably seen this too, where I'll say, okay, this is what's going on. Well, what do you want? Well, I don't really know, but I know it's not this thing that I'm experiencing. Like, excellent. We don't have to do that thing. What do you want? And we never really know because we're always accommodating everyone else and making sure everyone else is taken care of. And so I heard this, I think it was a podcast years ago, and they're like, well, people pleasing is a way of manipulation. I'm like, oh, I've never looked at it in that perspective. Yeah. And so I thought, oh, okay, now that doesn't feel as great, right? Because we always think if we're people pleasing, then we're making other people feel good. It's a good thing. We also get ourselves to make it make sense. But the manipulation piece was, oh, okay, well, I don't want to be doing that. And I don't really know myself. So those are the big things that, we do these for years and decades. So it's hard to look at it with a different perspective because we've just been living our life through that lens, that people-pleasing lens.
My listeners are probably tired of me telling this story, but like I'll never forget working with this one client, and I don't know how it got to the point where she was having like an identity crisis. And that's really the shift I made in my coaching after that client and moving to identity work first. Is she's like, I don't even know what my favorite color is. I know I tell people pink because that's what people expect me to say, but I have no idea what my actual favorite color is. Like as simple as that was really hard for her to say, I have no idea. And it was just that to me was such a profound point in my coaching that instead of like working on leadership and productivity, I've really come to identity first work. Have you seen some of that switching in your own coaching with your experience in neurodiversity?
Yeah. And I joke that I stopped asking anyone in vet med what their hobbies were because no one has them, or they have a bunch, or it's our pets. And I'm like, excellent. What do you do? And they're like, well, and we just don't even know what would light us up, because as long as it's not this thing that's exhausting, maybe it would be cool. Maybe I would like to do that, but we don't even really know. And I love that, going with the identity work, because I tell my clients, I'm like, you have to understand that we've been, especially if you're a veterinarian, like high school, college, vet school, we're conditioned to look for what other people think is acceptable, not only grades, external validation. So we lose ourselves because we never really develop ourselves too in that whole process.
Yeah. I say masking is the ultimate identity eraser, right? It erodes our identity and who we are and what we think we know about ourselves.
Yes.
What I have seen is people are like really highly capable, right? And they think that's sort of a compliment. But do you find it with your clients that like, I tend to see like highly capable veterinarians as my clients is typically who I see. And they're like the ones that are called upon, the ones that are doing like a ton more work, and they're highly respectable and they're complimented all the time about like, do you see that as being a major struggle for them too? The way, I don't know if I'm even saying that right, but do you understand what I'm saying? Like they are that way because of, I don't know, maybe it's the response to the negative feedback in the past, but I always see that highly capable people are working so much harder. And where do you see that they're struggling?
Yeah, I think because a lot of us are so solution based and problem solvers, that because and capable, that there is no concept that we shouldn't do something. If we're capable and we can do it, then why wouldn't we do it? And I think that's where that loop happens. And then throw in like the guilt factor. That's what I've kind of articulated from a lot of my, yeah, the guilt and the shame, right? Number one, that's me 100%. And it's not that like, yeah, they're capable and they can do those things. But when we experience so much guilt by not doing that, that's where I think we get stuck and we repeat that cycle if we're not aware of that. Because I think society too, in general, will condition us to be like, you should be a team player and you should go all out and like, yes, but like anything else, there's a boundary around that we need to have, because no one else is going to give us that boundary. But if we don't have it for ourselves, it's a bad recipe. Yeah.
And as soon as I have someone saying, "Oh, I'm highly capable," or "I'm highly productive," it's like those are the key words for me, and I'm like, "Ooh, that's a dangerous compliment you're giving yourself," because I always think it's like you are suffering in a way that does not inconvenience anyone, and therefore it's overlooked.
Yes. Yes. And a lot of that too, like I see that where I'm like, they don't feel comfortable. I'm curious to see if you've heard this too, but they don't feel comfortable slowing down. It's their day off. They're like, well, it's my day off. I'm going to clean the house. I'm going to go work in the barn. I'm like, I get that because I 100% did all those things, but can you do something that it doesn't matter what the outcome is if you enjoy doing it? It has to have no outcome of productivity. Can you do that and enjoy it? And a lot of times that's just not how we even view, life outside of work, or to have a life outside of work.
Yeah, I had one client, and like so many profound moments with my clients, but I had one client tell me that not being productive was equivalent to death with him. And I was like taken aback by that. And I'm like, oh, like, and to have it like the awareness to be able to say that, I was processing what was going on. And he was like, productivity is like akin to death. And it was like, oh my goodness. And just
Wow.
that level of awareness was absolutely like, I think, groundbreaking for some to have, like, productivity is not your whole self-worth, right? But oftentimes we make it our self-worth because that's where the validation is, especially when we've been given negative feedback. Like, you're not proving, not living up to your potential, and you're being lazy, and all of the things that we get early on in life.
Yeah. And there's so many people that have the idea that, they do have to be productive and give to others to be, beneficial. And so I'm always like, well, if you sat on the couch and you did nothing productive, you weren't scrolling, you weren't watching TV, like, what does that feel like for you? And they're like, no, it doesn't feel great. That I'm like, okay, that's where we have to change that pattern, because it does, predict how we do certain things if it's benefiting someone else, like you said.
What has helped you start working with your brain instead of against it? Like, I know I hear people say it, I've said it. What does that look like for you when you start working with your brain?
Yeah, the biggest first step is to give myself some compassion and self-compassion that I know it actually feels really good. It's part of the unmasking, and it's like, Amber, I'm going to forget that thing and maybe I should write it down. Or if I forget it, instead of getting frustrated, I'm just like, oh, that's the ADHD part. Oh, well, moving on, and it's part of that is now knowing, right? Because if I didn't know before, I would have just beat myself up that I forgot. But that's, there's 300 tabs open on my computer in my brain, and they're all running the different things and they're all talking at the same time. And so I like to do things that I know have worked for me. And I think that's part of the autistic side. Like, I do like to be organized, and that feels good, not too structured. But the biggest one is when I'm not feeling
organized chaos.
Yeah. Yeah. When I'm not feeling something, whether it's like to do certain work or certain activities, I still have to make a conscious conversation with myself of, okay, so right now I'm going to elect not to do that thing, and it's okay. And I still have to say that to myself, but it gives myself permission of, okay, this isn't going to be one of those days where I do a bunch of stuff and it's still okay.
Those permission slips are huge on giving yourself permission to act differently than you have before. How do you help your clients see or move from self-blame to self-understanding?
I think a lot of the pieces of that, of course, it's going to look a little bit different, but it's going to, what is your intention? A lot of the time, our intention of doing something is, like, I just had a client the other day, and she was kind of in contract negotiations. And so she had a conversation with her boss, and the outcome wasn't what she wanted, but nothing changed. There wasn't anything, the ball's still very much in her court. And so she got very, flustered and kind of overwhelmed of like, oh, well, nothing changed. They didn't understand X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, hold on. You would not have had this conversation 3 weeks ago. So can we celebrate that? And when you're going through it of like the intention of having the conversation, like, let's celebrate that. So I think that's where you can easily go down the spiral of, okay, I didn't do it right. I didn't say it right. They took it wrong. They think I'm being high maintenance, but really it's the same situation. It's now, okay, but would you have done this 3 weeks ago? Would you have even tiptoed around having the idea of this conversation? And she's like, oh, right. Yes. No, probably not. And I'm like, you're still in a really good position. And there's nothing that has been decided. So we've already, how we do, like, we've already catastrophized that all these things are going to be going on, and not one of those things has happened. So it's just, I love coaching others, and I love for myself having been coached of like, okay, thank you for bringing me back down to earth. That different perspective is like, it's just night and day difference.
I think that's really where coaching is really powerful, right? Because it's not because someone needs to be fixed. It's really because, like, we need to be able to see, we need a space where we can see our patterns like clearly with compassion and without the shame. And I really love that you said like giving yourself compassion first, because that was like, yes, please. So this podcast is called Left Unattended, and I ask this in different ways because it means something different to every guest. But like for you, what does being left unattended mean?
So this will you'll probably laugh, but when I think left unattended, I think of like the first time I was probably a solo doctor by myself, and my receptionist comes running back and there's an emergency, and she's like, and I'm like, whoa, okay, hold on, let me ask an adult. And I'm like, oh, hold on, that's me. I was left unattended. I think part of that neurodivergency is like we always feel like we're kids, but at the same time, we also feel like we're so much older. And I felt that throughout my whole life. So being left unattended, I'm always assuming that and hoping that there's someone else there that knows more than I do. And, now realizing it doesn't matter if that person is there or not. I know what I need to do. And if I don't know what I need to do, I know where to find that answer. And I think that's like a great description of how that fits into vet med and how I see that.
Oh, I love that. And we can now tend to ourselves, right?
Yes.
I think what I keep coming back to in this conversation is that there's so many neurodivergent individuals or professionals that are not struggling because they have capacity, they don't have capacity, or they lack capacity. They're struggling because so much of their capacity is spent like adapting and masking and like translating, recovering, all of the things, just trying to make work doable inside of systems that were really never designed for us. So what I hear kind of in your story is not just like burnout, but I hear a lot of brilliance, right? Like that pattern recognition, which can be really beautiful, lots of empathy and the self-compassion, wonderful communication. And I hear a person who has learned that doing it differently is not a failure. And I absolutely love that. It was survival that turned into strategy.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, I love that.
Where can people find you and learn more about your work?
So I mostly hang out on social media on Instagram. It's at Dr. for doctor, Amber Parks, AMBERPARKS, or my website, which is thestressandburnoutcoach.com.
Awesome. Definitely go and check Dr. Parks out. And for anyone else who's listening, who felt something click today, especially if you're realizing that the way you work or lead or communicate or recover is costing you more than you thought, I would love to have a real conversation with you. A discovery call is not a sales trap. I'm sure the same with Dr. Parks here. It's really a space to look at what feels heavy, what keeps repeating, what kind of support might help you move to more clarity, confidence, and self-trust. You can grab a spot for me at coaching.synapt.me. So thank you very much, Dr. Parks, for coming and being a guest in the show. I think we could talk forever because I have so much more I want to pick your brain at, colleague to colleague, but thank you for being here. And I hope this conversation continues.
Yeah. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I know, I think we'll have to do, maybe do a lecture somewhere or some sort of conference or something. I would love that. I think we'd get both perspectives, which would be really powerful. So yeah, I'm excited.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Left Unattended. A huge thank you to Dr. Amber Parks for sharing her story, her insights, and such an honest look at burnout, neurodivergence, self-compassion, and what it means to stop treating survival strategies like a permanent job description. You can find Dr. Parks on Instagram at Dr. Amber Parks, and through her website at thestressandburnoutcoach.com. And of course, thank you to Dustin Bays for editing and helping making sure that this episode sounds as good as it feels. If today's conversation made something click for you, especially around people pleasing, masking, sensory overload, or the pressure to keep proving your capacity, I want you to know this: you are not broken because work feels heavy. Sometimes the weight is not your ability. Sometimes the weight is the system, the expectations, and the amount of yourself you have had to hide in order to keep going. If you want more reflections like this, join my newsletter for weekly insights on neuroinclusive leadership at synapt.me. That's syn-apt.me/newsletter. And if you're realizing that the way you work, lead, communicate, or recover is costing you more than a thought, I would love to have a real conversation with you. The discovery call is not a sales trap. It's a space to look at what feels heavy, what keeps repeating, and what kind of support might help you move forward with more clarity, confidence, and self-trust. You can learn more about coaching with me at coaching.synap.me. And remember, that's syn-apt.me. And finally, if this episode resonated with you, please follow the podcast and leave a review. It helps more people find these conversations and reminds the world that belonging is not a luxury, it's a leadership strategy. I'm your host, Ron Sosa, and this has been Left Unattended. Until next time.